The Ensemble podcast is intended for professional financial advisors. All discussion is limited to publicly available information and should not be interpreted as legal, professional, or financial advice. Ensemble does not hold an AFS license nor provide any financial services. Before making investment decisions, you should obtain financial advice from a qualified financial advisor.
Hello, my name's James Wrigley. I'm a financial advisor and one of the principals of Melbourne-based financial planning firm First Financial. I've been a long-term listener and contributor to the Ensemble group and podcast, picking up some amazing nuggets of gold over the years. And through this podcast and the people that I'm able to speak to and interview, hopefully I can continue to deliver some of those nuggets of gold to you.
IntelliFlow is on a mission to give more people access to financial advice. Their technology, IntelliFlow Office, powers and streamlines the advisory experience for over 30,000 financial advisors worldwide, making an impact at every stage of the advice process, including practice management, revenue management, cash flow modelling, client portals, and more. IntelliFlow Office helps advisors manage all their client and provider data within a single integrated ecosystem that just works. Discover IntelliFlow for yourself by visiting intelliflow.com.
Hello, welcome back to another episode. I'm James Wrigley and I have the pleasure of speaking with Bruce Madden. Bruce runs a business called Madden and Associates, kind of PR, communications, that kind of thing. I'll get Bruce to explain what he's up to, but as I was just saying before we pressed record, we should have pressed record as soon as we started this because I think there's been a bit of good chat we've had already. Anyway, Bruce, thank you for joining me this afternoon to have
Thank you, James. And yeah, I agree. It's lovely to talk to you. And I think the concept of quality financial advice and the growth of the ensemble idea and this collective notion of advisors coming together to help themselves, I really love that. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I hope I can add some value to the listeners.
Thanks for joining us. So we're going to tackle this kind of idea of advice reputation or advisor reputation, and we'll come at it from a few different angles. But that'll kind of be the gist of the podcast. And maybe if we start off with I think it may be a tricky question to answer. You might not think the case, but this idea of advice reputation, is there a difference between advice reputation from an industry profession perspective versus an advisor reputation? So my reputation versus another advisor versus someone else. Are the two different, and how are they different, do you think?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. Thank you. And it's an important question because the two are intertwined. And what we know about reputation is that your personal effort, your personal relationships, your business, your results that you achieve with your customers will have a huge determinant on your personal reputation. Okay. Now, you're operating under that brand, but also essentially an umbrella brand of financial advice. So, that it's the old adage, really, and I do a lot of work in helping organizations in the financial services space with their reputation as it relates to managing media and their public face, so how they're represented through media. And I look back over the last 30-odd years of doing this as a journalist, and also in the last 20 years as an advisor and a PR person, a strategic communications person, really. And I'd say, well, there are so many great advisors who have a fantastic reputation, who do excellent work, who are being tarred with the brush of the reputation of what was financial advice, but misconstrued financial advice.
Yep.
So that's really interesting to me, James, because I remember standing up one time at a Financial Planning Association Congress. It was in the mid-2000s, and I was talking exactly on this subject in that time. So that's 2007, in fact, just before the global financial crisis, before the world got a bit crazy. So I got up and there was maybe 2,000 people in the room, and I talked about the movie 300 starring Gerard Butler. And I likened that movie, which was a story of some 300 brave Spartans who fought off the might of the Persian armies. And those 300 were, in my narrative, the financial advisors suffering the slings and arrows of the regulators, the consumer lobby, the media, and other protagonists who were seeking to attack them on the basis of their perceived weaknesses as a financial advice, a true and genuine financial advice offer. And I helped to promote the idea that the best way to correct your reputation, defend your reputation, build and create a positive reputation was, yes, you've got to observe all the regulatory issues, you've got to understand the consumer, and at that point it was mostly the industry superannuation funds that were quite vocal in attacking advice. But you have to reach deep and identify those things where you actually personally make a difference. In a sense, corporatize that. So corporatize that essence of quality advice. And that was all about the customer experience and the very positive value and benefits that advice brings that we all know about. And it was interesting because at the end of that process, because I'd made some comments about what is advice and what's not advice, and one of the comments was, look, if you've got over 1,000 customers on your books, and some people who called themselves advisors in those days actually had a book of clients that was in the 2,000s and above.
Yeah, right.
I said, look, that's not advice. That's something else. You can't possibly offer advice to that many people, And so I had at the end of that session, I had a line of people who wanted to beat me up. They were the old school with the large client books, and there were those that were more interested in the idea of their personal brand and how to fix their industry brand, if you like, or industry reputation. And those were the ones that have, I thought got on and did a great job in terms of developing their independent models and cut loose from their licensees and started practicing actual advice, not product distribution.
Gotcha. Can you talk a little bit about, so you mentioned that, attending an FPA conference and doing a presentation and so forth. Can you give us a little bit of a backstory on kind of who's Bruce, what's Bruce's situation, and how have you, what are you doing now in terms of the communication? What does that actually look like? And a bit of the work history to where you are now.
Sure. So, look, I guess I still identify as a writer and a journalist. That was my vocation. That's something that I was always drawn to as a child, and I began after university in operating in different industries, and I was drawn via a friend across to the David Koch house. David, back in the day, ran a number of financial publications and did a lot of consumer finance, but he had money management amongst his stable. David was one of the founding editors of Money Management, which is now 30-odd years, still running it after 30 years, servicing the sector. Yeah. So I joined David at about the same time that Paul Keating and the Labor government of the day, 1992, created the superannuation guarantee system, the SG system of mandated superannuation. And interestingly enough, Keating at that time had the reputation as the godfather, if you like, of financial planning.
Yeah.
So until that time, there were agents, there were advisors that were doing interesting things within the larger institutions. But because suddenly everyday Australians had superannuation accounts to look after and weren't automatically going on the age pension, that system, was quite revolutionary, and it spawned a lot of activity from the asset management production side, so the fund managers, and then the advisors giving advice to customers. So I joined Money Management circa mid-1990s, I think, just after that, the creation of the SG system. I then went on to do a lot of different media, launched some publications. I launched another magazine called Asset at the Fairfax Group. It was part of the BRW Media organisation. It went on for about 10 years until it was subsumed by the Financial Review, the AFR. We're now in the early 2000s, and I started in consulting. So I started in public relations, and my company now, Madden Associates, we're just won PR Agency of the Year in 2023, which is wonderful. And we're a boutique firm, and we have some financial advice organisations on our books very proudly. We've worked with a number of great financial advisory firms. We've helped launch firms. There was a business back in the day that was called Centric Wealth that still exists, and it's been rolled up into another group. But through that process, I've met a lot of great advisors who are actually advisors, not the other form that I mentioned earlier. But
when I think of PR, and I don't know, maybe it's just the news cycle. When I think of PR, I automatically go to, oh no, something bad's happened, and I need someone to help me manage the fallout from this thing that's happened.
The spin doctor.
Yeah, is that just what it is in the TV shows, or is that what it is in real life? What is working in PR? What is it?
It's a great question. So, and this is why I don't like the term PR, because it has so much ambiguity around it.
Yeah.
So you do get that sort of classic Hollywood. The PR guy is the spin doctor, or the person that indulges in the dark arts of spinning a client out of trouble. That sort of style. But I think, from my point of view, coming from a very strong journalism background, and having had exposure to a whole range of different mediums and audiences, and obviously taking the line of the transparency, integrity, truth, those things matter. So that's all part of your moral compass. So for us, PR is all about those things. It's being transparent. It's being transparent to the media that we're talking to on a daily basis, but also with the client. Importantly, it's no different to financial advice and advisors. You, as a professional services business, you need that level of mutual trust and respect and integrity with your clients. So that certainly guides what we do. And in effect, PR is a bit of a misnomer for us. It's more that we are communication strategists. So we do our best work where there's reputation issues involved. Some of our work that we're most proud of, you will never see in the media, because it's helped avoid a crisis. It's helped to communicate well internally inside an organization. An example might be a cyber event where there's a fraud that's been committed, and were that not managed well and legally and resolved, and then you could have had chaotic sort of consequences on the outside in terms of public run on a super fund, for example, or banking, that sort of thing.
Gotcha. In terms of communication, so obviously we're communicating now, just talking. We're all, as advisors, we're communicating with our clients, and it might be staff and all the rest of it. Like, do you have any tips on how? On how? I'm going to say, how can I be an effective communicator? But what does that even mean? But like, how can anyone that's listening, can they? Is there something that they can take from this about how can they communicate better? Is there something along those lines you can?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've done a lot of media training actually within financial licensees, and for the advisors that want a media profile, it's an important part of understanding that when you're communicating, it's rarely about yourself. It's about the audience that you're targeting, and particularly if you're talking via the channel of media. But I think one of the things I love to raise in those sessions is to talk about the power of 3. So 3 is a magic number, and if you have just 3 things that you want to convey to a client or to an audience, you'll invariably win them over and satisfy their need for information. If you give them 4, that's one too many, and they've forgotten what the first one is.
Gotcha.
If you give them 2, then you're a dill. You don't know what you don't know what you're talking about. So the impression is that 3 just resolves it. And this is founded in the teachings of Aristotle. So the ancient Greeks got it right. And from the Aristotle point of view, it's 3 components of oration: ethos, pathos, and logos.
Yeah.
So ethos being, is it the right thing to do? Is it ethical? And pathos is emotion, it's the heart, and logos, logic, the head. So you got to get the head, the heart, and you got to do the right thing. And that's simply how to be more effective with a client or with any audience, and that goes way beyond just making sure that the SOA is completed and the fact find's done and the due diligence is all tidied up. It's actually listening with intent and hearing the client and repeating that back to them, but also utilizing those other elements that I just talked about.
Yep.
I think that's really important. It's pretty simple, but a lot of people let their ego or they let their own stuff get in the way and don't allow enough time to listen in order to, effectively respond to the need or what that person is actually trying to convey to you.
Yeah. And before we started recording this, you were talking about the power of kind of using anecdotes of things that have happened to you in the past and these kind of stories. Like, how do you bring that
Absolutely. So, everyone has an opinion, I guess, and opinions, are fine in terms of signaling your intent, but it's the proof. It's the proof point. It's the evidence. It's the statistical data. It's the case studies. It's the anecdotes. It's the stories that won me over when we created the Financial Planner of the Year Award in money management in the mid-90s, and I changed up the protocol for that, or the judging criteria. So it wasn't just a popularity contest. We had to we asked advisors to send in client testimonials, actual written. So what we got was incredible in the mid-90s. So it was we got birthday cards that were sent from clients. We got letters that were written, long handwritten tomes of wonderful examples of proving the quality of the advice and, what happened when I had an accident and then we had to lodge a claim on the insurance, and how the advisor, turned up at my house and sat down at the kitchen table and we worked through it, and then we worked out what we're going to do with all the money. And I owe all of my, my current good fortune to the role that this person played in my life.
Yeah.
So it's really powerful. So it people will buy from people. People will trust people, and I think that if you show them, not tell them, then you're doing a really good job to get that efficacy in your communication to really show that you mean business.
So we're recording this episode that the day after the quality of advice kind of reforms and kind of response, whatever you want to call it, it's just been announced.
Yeah.
Are we at a point, or will we ever be at a point where financial advice is kind of regarded as a profession in the vein of accountants and doctors and those kind of things? And does announcements in the last 24 hours help or hinder that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And James, I've asked myself this question in consecutive decades since the 1990s. So let me phrase it this way. And if just indulge me for a minute as I walk back a bit, and let's go back to 92, right, with the SG and Keating and the birth of financial planning through that process. That was a Labor government that brought that policy in. We now have another Labor government. So fast forward some 31 years, and yet another review on top of another review on top of another review on ad nauseum on the financial services sector, and in particular the advice sector. So the quality of advice review was supposedly about providing greater access and affordability to all Australians to what has become a very rare commodity, which is quality financial advice, due to the lack of numbers of advisors. We have too few trying to serve a lot of people. But it's curious to me that essentially the same system of SG that launched financial planning also launched the industry funds, and the great power that the superannuation sector now wields in terms of its $4 trillion and growing by mandated growth. It's an extraordinary legacy for Keating, but it also means that the minister or the assistant treasurer, when he announced this week the findings of his year-long review of the Levy document, he chose to sit down with a bunch of executives from the superannuation industry to give them a heads up first go at what he was planning. So, it's this is all political in a sense, but it's got kind of an interesting cycle to it, doesn't it? It's a 30-year cycle of incredible growth. But what does it mean for advisors? I think those that have survived and those that are attracted to this sector have probably, in my career, it's the first genuine, real go at creating that quality, professional, client-focused profession that has long been, sought by the financial planners that I respect. Some of whom have now retired in frustration, but those that I respect and who persevere are, they're on the cusp of something really great. But we can't do it in terms of lifting the heavy task of getting more quality advice into more Australians' hands without the superannuation funds and that sort of limited advice model that has been proposed.
Yeah, and it's as a kind of a communication expert, it's interesting to pick your brain on, the forum in which that was announced. Clearly that was done on purpose, but what do you think it means by having it launched in a particular forum like it was?
So having worked on the inside of the Financial Planning Association during the 2012-13 period when another Labor government was in power, and it was a young Chris Bowen who introduced the FOFO reforms, which brought in legislative fiduciary duty, the best interest test, and that future of financial advice was meant to be at that time the be all and end all in the corpus law of how to regulate the industry. And it was all, and I remind people as well that was then about access and affordability. Yeah. That was the government's spin on what that reform was about. But proudly for me, I was on the inside with the FPA, who was a client of mine at the time, and worked with then chair and the leadership group on making sure that the ban on conflicted remuneration was legislated and making sure that it stuck, because it was an important barrier that was preventing decent quality professional advice and a profession to finally emerge.
Yeah.
So I think we've now got to your question about the choice of the strategy to roll out the much anticipated release of the Quality of Advice Review. I think it was partly a slap in the face to those people who had done all the heavy lifting from the industry point of view, from the advice industry point of view, from the advice profession point of view, and to choose to enlist or pre-brief the superannuation funds, the industry funds. Yeah, I took that as a bit of a slap in the face, certainly to the existing professional bodies, so the FAAA, and also to the Financial Services Council, which represents the product manufacturers, who also have a stake in this in some ways. But look, they did manage to pre-brief our mate Alex Vikovich at the AFR, so he got the scoop. So they, this is all the politics and the strategizing that I understand how that works. But I note that there's been a pretty heavy media schedule that Stephen Jones has been on the talking circuit, talking up why there's some 5 million Australians about to retire who need advice, can't afford it. The best way to do it is through the fiduciary, framework of their superannuation fund, et cetera, et cetera. But there's no discussion about really that core issue of how do we avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, where we allow limited advice models to basically become wholesale distribution mechanisms to rip people off. Because I'll remind people again that that Chris Bowen FOFA scenario, that only came about because in 2009 we're at the aftermath of Storm Financial, that collapse, and also Opus Prime, another major collapse. And these legislative reactions follow those enormous kind of heartbreaking stories that happen when you have the wrong people doing the wrong thing with other people's money. And
you bring a really interesting conversation to the table in that you do some work with financial advisors and financial advice businesses around their communication and so forth, but then you've got this bit of history of being on the inside with the FPA or whoever else it might be. So it's an interesting perspective that you can bring to it, and then it's actually, I know.
Thank you, James. I think it's quite unique, but there was some other organisations that I've also worked on the inside of. For example, the formation of the AFCA, the Financial Complaints Authority, which came out of what used to be called FOS, the Financial Ombudsman Service. So when it formulated, we were asked to help communicate it and to work with the new CEO and the board at that time, and sort of. Now that happened just on the eve of the Hayne Royal Commission. So we also got dragged into the Hayne Royal Commission on the basis that much of the evidence that was brought before Hayne and that came through that commission was sourced through the AFCA case file. So there was a lot of crossover there in terms of evidence to support the prosecution of wrongdoing by some of the larger institutions. So we're now seeing, as a result of that, those same institutions have exited the advice space. They've sold up and moved on. And back in the day, then I was preparing witnesses for that. If you remember the Hayne, the Royal Commission process, it was and talking about reputation, it was really you had a single camera on the witness in the stand being grilled by the lawyers and over certain events that they had to recall over some years, and there was no real opportunity for giving contextual background to any of those events, so that the people were really it was a perception medium of the highest order, and you were guilty unless proven otherwise. So really difficult times, but look, that's a moment, another sort of footnote in history, but a very important one, really. And the thing I'm trying to lead up to is that all of these things matter. All of this history matters in the minds, particularly of those 5 million Australians that are those boomers that are about to retire, that the Minister Jones, the Assistant Treasurer, talks about. They'll have memory of that stuff. They'll have memory of these issues, and it's an important part of this discussion, I think, James, is trust. How do we install trust in the minds of that cohort of people? Or do we just look to the younger cohort of people who also need help, and the next generations? I think that's another incredibly important part of the puzzle here.
I guess it kind of circles back to what we were saying at the start around kind of advisor or advice reputation, that these kind of building blocks of the story that these 5 million people that are going to be heading into retirement, that we're all supposed to try and help in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
They've got some story of what they've been reading in the press and wherever else, and they'll form an opinion before they.
They will, but they'll also be guided by their immediate social group. And if we're talking about advice as an organisation, as a corporate reputation, say, then we know that there are certain levers or factors, really coefficients like that, help determine corporate reputation. So, it's things like your social responsibility, It's the profitability of your organization to a certain point. So think about the bank's half-yearly results, record profits. So billions of dollars in record profits. That's a good thing if you're a shareholder, but a not so good thing if you're a mortgage holder under pain of increasing cash rates. And so there's a dilemma there, right? There's a corporate reputation issue. So those two parts, it's like a balancing act. So they would look at that and go, well, we now need to dial up other parts of our reputation. So we'll start to increase the communication in the market around our social responsibility. So I don't know, if you're a Westpac, you might start running ads on the rescue helicopter that you sponsor that saves lives, or you might look at other aspects of how you develop community relations or how you're giving back. And that is all designed to offset, the downside or negative impacts of having too much profit. So it's a constant dynamic, and this is the sort of it sounds quite cynical, doesn't it, when you think about it in that you're actually managing it from this point of view. It's not, but you must manage it, and that's the message to anyone in business, really, that you really should understand what constitutes reputation and how to manage it. And because reputation at its heart is what others think about you and what others say about you when you're not in the room. And, and that's incredibly important, particularly, as I said, as we've got this massive opportunity ahead for financial advice in Australia.
Yep. Now you've just launched, or kind of fill me in on it, some like a immediate training of some variety. Like what is that? What is it? And what's going on? What's the plans?
So our message, so media training really is, again, we do a lot. We're actually in the middle of a major round of helping a top 10 ASX company who's just integrated another large business into its fold. So the idea there is that they need those people to be able to essentially communicate off the same consistent hymn sheet. And I had a guy actually last week turn up and say, very senior guy, similar age to myself, 30 years in business. Well, I'm not here to be turned into some, puppet, and with a marketing message, and that's not what I'm going to. I said, well, that's great, because I'm not here to turn you into a puppet, and that's not what we do. So it is actually more about understanding how to connect with others and remain authentic in that process, but also more than that, to be much more clear and articulate on how messages are formulated and what happens when you're communicating to another human being, what they are doing in processing that information, and how you need to understand what's going on in their minds to resolve some questions that will naturally occur when you start to try to convince them of the merit of your thesis or of your position or of your advice. So, and that's essentially it. So media training is really a construct for us to talk about message delivery and effective communication. And
there's something specific in that space you're doing with female advisors. Is that you're doing something along those lines?
Yeah. So recently, absolutely. So there's a big issue in representation. There's a female representation issue, full stop, but there's a symbolically more challenging issue in that the media has a very low representation of females when it comes to finance, when it comes to the superannuation sector that we've been talking about today. And it's something like sub 20%, and it's projected over the next 10 years to get to maybe 34% in terms of, versus male representation as the voice. Now, as a PR firm, we have daily interactions with media, and they're crying out. They're saying, who have you got that's a woman that we can profile. And I'm keen and have been for some time to help correct that balance, but also to work with organisations that have great women. And I know there's a lot of organisations who are seeking to promote on merit the women who are making a really enduring contribution to the industry and to their own careers, and juggling so many facets of their family lives and their professional lives. So I together with Vanessa Stoikov, who's an old friend of mine who runs a media content business, we've pulled together a program to help empower more women and have them prepared to do and train them and have them set up well to do media. And to talk about, if they're a financial advisor, to talk about what they do and how they impact others. If they're working in the product side of the industry, to talk about the technical aspects of it, or in superannuation, to talk about the role that money can play positively in the lives of others, not necessarily just women, but women generally have more challenges in terms of equity in pay, but also in time off for families and starting families, becoming mums, and returning to the workforce. Now, that's not to say that we're taking a traditionalist view. It's just the pragmatics and the reality of society.
Yep. Well, Bruce, thank you for joining me today. If anyone wants to reach out to you, find out a little bit more about what you do, this skills builder thing that you've just been mentioning, about trying to build some profiles. Where can people find you? We'll put some links into the show notes, but for anyone that's listening, where can people find you?
Wonderful. Well, they can reach out to us at madden.com.au, just on the website. I could give you all my socials, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. But
we'll put some links into wherever people might be picking this up from, one of the podcast platforms or wherever else.
Thank you, James.
We'll get some links from you and put them in there.
Wonderful.
Bruce, pleasure to have a chat with you. Thank you for joining me. I'm sure there's a fair bit of value in this conversation for lots of people. Thank you.
I hope so. It's been great to talk to you as well. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.